Well, joining me now to discuss the factors that affect charitable giving is Emily Barman. She's a professor of sociology and the Associate Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Boston University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
So give us an idea, how big of a role did the Trump tax plan play in whether individuals cut back on donations versus other factors?
Yeah, it's hard to precisely adjudicate to identify the effect of the new Trump tax law, but we know a couple of things. We know that the number of individuals who chose to itemize their deductions, which is the way in which the tax law incentivizes charitable giving, we know that that number plunged by over half last year. So clearly, individuals were not itemizing their deductions, which is one of the important drivers of charitable donations in the United States.
Did we see this vary by income, across income brackets, or was it something that we saw across the board?
We saw this primarily affecting those in the middle and working classes. So those who are wealthy, those who are in the top 1%, for example, they continue to implement itemized tax deductions, and they did so by making larger gifts because, of course, the reason why the tax changes affected charitable giving is that the amount of the standard deduction doubled for an individual, for example, went from $6,000 to $12,000. So the amount of charitable donations you'd have to make would have to have doubled as well in order to have itemized deductions be worth your while rather than taking the standardized deduction.
And even though individual giving went down, we saw that corporations and foundations did increase their giving. What do you think prompted that,
right.
and how sustainable is that?
Well, so it depends. The effect of that is pretty important for particular nonprofits, but I think corporations and foundations made higher levels of corporate gifts. Some have argued precisely because of those same changes to the tax laws. They were benefiting from a lower tax bill themselves and had a greater profit rate to donate to charities, particularly for corporations, obviously.
And were there some causes that took a bigger hit than others with this tax change?
Yes, absolutely. So if we recognize that the effect of the tax change was to de-incentivize those who couldn't exceed the new standard deduction amount, that means that those who were making less were less likely to itemize and therefore less likely to make a charitable donation. We know that the wealthy tend to make particular types of donations. They give to donor-advised funds, they give to foundations, and they also give to interests that are dear to their heart, so things like the opera, ballet, museums, and hospitals. Those who weren't making itemized deductions and therefore weren't making charitable donations tend to give to other types of causes. And it's one of the implications of this has been particularly bad for churches and congregations, where they rely on a large number of very small gifts from those who attend their churches. And so churches and congregations really felt this, it's believed, the most.
Now, even though there was a drop among individual givers, I mean, America is considered one of the more charitable countries. How does it stack up against other nations?
Well, it's by far one of the most charitable nations, but it's actually, if we think about if we control for the sort of the type of donations that are made, there are some other countries that are equally as charitable, but they tend to give more to the organizations that they belong to member associations. So some Scandinavian countries are equally as charitable as the United States. But Americans tend to give to different causes. They tend to give to churches, as I said, and to causes that are more to do with health and human services rather than member associations like skating clubs or bowling clubs or organizations like that, leisure activities.
So as they adapt, how are charities reworking their strategies to keep donors engaged and consistent in their giving?
Yeah, it's a real battle for the non-elite charities, those charities that have relied on small gifts from everyday Americans. One of the strategies that they're using is led by the United Way of America. Nonprofits are banding together to try and change tax law yet again so that charitable deductions remain return to being itemized no matter how big the standard deduction is. That's one strategy they're pursuing. And the other strategy that they're pursuing is reaching out in new ways to potential donors, those for whom perhaps itemized deductions, the effect on their taxes is less salient. So Generation X, millennial donors are less driven by the tax implications of giving. And so many nonprofits are working towards online or social media campaigns in order to reach out to those type of donors who are driven more by sort of on-the-spot social media influences from peers and influencers, rather than a kind of rational tax-based, tax-driven decision.
Now, to a different kind of donor now, these so-called zombie donors, people might not be familiar. These are people who have died and left their wealth to causes and charities that were relevant or acceptable at the time, but that didn't necessarily stand the test of time. What do we know about the sort of regulations that are going to be governing that?
So as far as I understand, that continues to be the case. And so for particular charities, and these types of cases often receive a lot of attention, but it's relatively rare, and it's been challenged in the court, and it typically has held. And so zombie philanthropy continues to be an issue for a small number of nonprofits. What's happening now, zombie philanthropy actually now has turned to be used to donor-advised funds, which is where the elites invest in a donor-advised funds, and there are no rules or regulations requiring any type of charitable payout. So there are hundreds of millions of dollars right now sitting in donor-advised funds in the United States, and none of that money is going to charity, although the actual donors did receive tax deductions when they made that initial gift.
Interesting stuff. Thanks so much. Emily Barman there, Professor of Sociology and the Associate Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Boston University.
Thanks.